The entire classroom laughed when the human girl was slapped 11 seconds later. 2 aliens were on the floor, and nobody in the station ever looked at humans the same way again. Let me be very clear about something before I begin this account. I, Brelek, son of Vrenna, grandson of the great Sylvani philosopher Orvis Tan, a being of 4 arms, exceptional academic scores, and a deep personal belief in the power of rational thinking, was absolutely, completely, and entirely wrong about humans. I want that on record. I want that carved into whatever stone monument they eventually build to commemorate this day, because somebody should acknowledge it, and it might as well be me. Station Varuki 9 is what you would call, if you were feeling generous, a multicultural learning environment. If you were feeling honest, you would call it a floating metal box crammed with 17 different species of adolescents who all think they are smarter than each other, circling a gas giant that nobody cares about for 3 academic cycles. The Galactic Collegiate Exchange Program. Very prestigious, very enlightening, very much a place where I now sleep with one eye open. The classroom itself, Hall 42 Bravo, was a wide, curved room with adjustable seating for every body type, benches for the Karathi, who have no concept of chairs, hanging perches for the Vili, who find floors personally offensive, standard desks for everyone else. The lighting was calibrated to a compromise setting that gave every species a mild headache, which, in fairness, was the most equal treatment any of us received. There were 23 students in that class, 1 professor, a Drevian named Surath Vel, who smelled faintly of ammonia and had the teaching enthusiasm of a cooling star. And then there was Sable Chin. She was the only human on the station, not just in the class, on the entire station. Varukai 9 had never hosted a human student before, and I will tell you exactly what the collective student body thought about that, because I was part of that collective student body, and I am not proud of what I am about to say. We thought nothing of it. No, that is not quite right. We thought less than nothing. We thought it was at best a curiosity, a human, one of those small, soft, pink and brown, bilaterally symmetrical creatures from the 3rd planet of a single sun system that nobody had taken seriously until about 80 years ago. They had 2 arms, 2 legs, no natural armor, no venom, no echolocation, no secondary nervous system, no regenerative tissue capability beyond the most embarrassing level. They were squishy. That was the word that circulated through the dormitory halls within the first rotation. Squishy, breakable, adorable in the way that non-threatening things sometimes are, like the small decorative plants that Professor Sorath Vel kept on his desk, which had never once intimidated anyone. Sable sat 3 rows ahead of me. She had dark hair pulled into what I later learned humans call a bun, which sounds like a food item, and in retrospect should have been my first warning that humans name things for reasons I will never fully understand. She wore the standard exchange uniform, gray and blue, with a small patch on the sleeve that said Earth in Galactic standard script, as if she needed to advertise her origin point. She had what humans call a resting neutral expression, which means her face was simply at rest. Not broadcasting threat, not broadcasting fear, just existing, calmly, taking notes with a stylus she held in fingers that had no claws. Harmless, I thought. Absolutely harmless, I confirmed to myself. I was, as previously stated, wrong. You need to understand something about Goreth before I describe what he did. Goreth was a Makari. The Makari are large. I do not mean large in the polite, diplomatic sense that one uses at interstellar summits. I mean large in the sense that when Goreth walked into a room, the room reconsidered its own dimensions. He stood at roughly 2.5 meters, had a hide that was somewhere between stone and leather in texture, and possessed 4 legs arranged in a way that made him almost impossible to knock off balance. He had been placed in the exchange program because the Makari Collegiate Board believed that interspecies interaction would build character. It had not so far built character. His companion in misery was Tuvnek, a Dral, who was smaller than Gorath but compensated for this by being loud in the way that only truly insecure beings manage to sustain long-term. Tuvnek had 6 fingers on each hand, all of which he enjoyed using to flick, prod, and generally make contact with things that did not belong to him. Professor Surathvel had stepped out of the classroom. He did this occasionally, citing administrative necessities, which the rest of us understood to mean he needed to stand in the corridor and breathe recycled air in peace for 7 minutes before returning to 23 adolescents from 17 species. That was when Gorath decided to have some fun. He walked past Sable's desk, deliberately, slowly, and with the particular kind of casual cruelty that large beings sometimes deploy when they want to remind smaller beings of the arrangement of the universe. His shoulder, which was roughly the size and texture of a small geological feature, connected with Sable's shoulder as he passed. She rocked forward. Her study pad clattered off the desk. Her stylus rolled under the bench ahead of her. Gorath did not stop walking. He just laughed. A deep, grinding Makari laugh that rattled the perches above us and made Vili Prithan almost fall off her roost. Tuvnek, not wanting to be left out of the creative experience, strolled over, picked up her study pad from the floor, looked at it with theatrical curiosity, and set it back on the desk upside down. Then he reached over and struck her, open-handed, across the upper shoulder and arm, with the kind of force that was designed to humiliate more than injure. Among the Droll, this is what you do to something you consider beneath notice. It is called a placement strike. It means you are here, and I am above you, and we are all clear on this, yes? The classroom watched. I watched. Prithan watched from her perch with all 4 of her eyes. Kosovan, the Rethari student who sat next to me, made a sound under his breath that I believe was the Rethari equivalent of, "Oh, this is unfortunate." I, in my considerable wisdom, thought, here it comes, the human will either cry, which will be sad and awkward for everyone, or she will go to administration, which will result in a formal complaint that will be mediated over 6 sessions and result in a written apology that nobody means. That is how these things go. That is the rational, predictable, civilized outcome. Sable picked up her stylus from under the bench ahead of her. She picked up her study pad. She flipped it right side up, and she was quiet. Here is the thing about silence. I have studied 11 languages at this point in my academic career, and silence appears in all of them, but not as the same thing. In Sulvani culture, silence is contemplative, peaceful. In Korathi culture, silence is dangerous, because the Korathi only go quiet when they are about to do something structural to the environment. In Droll culture, silence from a target means submission. Gorath and Tuvnek certainly read it that way. They were catastrophically wrong. Sable sat at her desk and she was still. Not frozen, not scared still, the way prey animals go rigid when they have accepted the situation and decided that minimal movement gives minimal additional attention. This was different. I had seen videos in my xenobiology coursework of something called a large earth predator called a cat, and there is a specific quality to the way a cat goes still before it decides to do something. Every part of it becomes intentional. The stillness is not the absence of motion. The stillness is the holding of motion. Sable was holding motion. I did not know this at the time. I know it now because I have replayed this moment approximately 400 times in my memory since it occurred, and each time I find a new detail that should have been a warning to everyone in that room. Her hands were flat on the desk. Her breathing had changed. I did not notice this until later, but Prithan, whose species has exceptional sensory range, told me afterward that Sable's breathing had dropped from its normal pattern to something slower and deeper. Prithan said it smelled different. She could not explain what she meant by that. I researched it later. I found something in xenobiological literature about human adrenaline compounds and what they release into the air when triggered. I read the paper, I closed the paper, I sat quietly for a long time after. Gorath had made his way back to his own seat, still laughing about nothing in particular. But Tuvnek, who had less sense than Gorath and twice the arrogance, decided that the silence was an invitation. He interpreted her stillness as defeat, as the submissive acknowledgement of placement that the strike was supposed to produce. He leaned over her desk. He said something in Droll. I will not repeat it. My translation module caught it and flagged it with 3 separate content warnings, which tells you everything you need to know. He reached over and flicked her study pad off the desk again. He grinned. Sable looked up at him. I want to be precise here, because precision matters in a moment like this. She looked up at him, and her face was calm, and her eyes were doing something that I had no reference point for at the time. I have since found the reference. In pre-contact Earth literature, there is a phrase, 1,000-yard stare. It refers to the expression on the face of a human being who has gone somewhere inside themselves, where the normal social rules no longer apply, where the editing function that civilized beings use to manage their responses has been set aside, and what remains is something much older, much simpler, and much more honest about what the universe actually is. Tuvnek did not know the phrase. Tuvnek was about to receive a practical demonstration. What followed took approximately 11 seconds. I know this because Preethan, who is meticulous, checked her timepiece after and told me, 11 seconds. I want you to hold that number in whatever organ you use for comprehension. 11 seconds. I am going to describe this as accurately as I can. And I ask for your understanding when I say that some of it still does not make complete sense to me, because what I saw was not consistent with my prior model of what a human being was physically capable of, and updating that model has been an ongoing and deeply unsettling process. Sable stood up. This sounds simple. It was not simple. The way she stood up was not the way anyone in that classroom had ever stood up from a desk before. It was not gradual. It was not the unfolding of a body from a seated position. It was a single continuous movement, like something that had been coiled and released, and she was on her feet before any of us had processed that she had started moving. Tuvnek had time to register this. He did not have time to do anything with the information. Her right hand came up and caught his reaching arm at the wrist. This, alone, would not be remarkable, except for the grip. Tuvnek made a sound. The sound was the specific, involuntary vocal output of a being who has just discovered that the thing it dismissed as soft has, in fact, the grip strength of something that has spent its entire evolutionary history doing load-bearing physical tasks. Human hands, I later learned, can generate somewhere between 400 and 600 newtons of grip force, depending on the individual. And they were designed for exactly this kind of closing motion. Tuvnek's sound escalated. What came next happened very fast, and I will do my best. She turned his wrist, not violently, in the movie drama sense, but efficiently, in the way that a technician turns a component to reach the correct angle. Tuvnek's own arm became a problem for him. His body followed the direction of his arm, because the alternative was structural damage, and biological systems generally try to avoid structural damage until they no longer have the option. He went sideways. His face met the edge of the desk on his way down. I heard something pop. This was, I learned afterward, his jaw. Not broken. Dislocated. Relocated, if you want to be technical about it, to a position that the designers of the droll face had not intended it to occupy. Tuvnek made a new sound. This one did not have a category. It was the sound of a being encountering a reality it had not considered possible until this moment. Now, all of this took perhaps 5 seconds, and in those 5 seconds, Gorath had gone from laughing to standing to moving towards Sable, because Gorath was not smart, but he was loyal in the way that large, unthinking things sometimes are to each other. He came in fast, which for a Makari means a ground-shaking, desk-rattling approach that normally causes other beings to step back very quickly. Sable stepped forward. I cannot stress enough how wrong this was according to everything I had ever learned about physics, survival, and common sense. Gorath outweighed her by something in the range of 8 to 1. He had 4 legs. He had a hide that researchers had described in scientific literature as comparable to layered composite materials. He was a geological event wearing a student uniform. She stepped forward, and then she did something that I have watched in every available piece of Earth combat documentation since that day, and I still feel my secondary respiratory organ tighten every time I see it. She went low, she went inside his reach, she got underneath his center of gravity, and she used her entire body, her legs, her back, her hips, all of the stored kinetic energy of a creature that evolved under Earth's brutal, uncompromising 9.8 meters per second squared, and she moved him. Gorath went up. This is the part my brain still files under events requiring additional verification. Gorath went up, and then Gorath came down, and the floor of Hall 42 Bravo made a sound that I am fairly certain was heard 3 decks above us. His legs were in the wrong positions. One of his arms was bent at an angle that suggested the shoulder joint had made a decision it would later regret. He was not unconscious, but he was also not standing up. He was doing the thing that beings do when they have been so thoroughly introduced to the floor that they need a moment to review their relationship with gravity. Sable stepped back. She looked at them. She picked up her study pad from the floor. She sat down. She flipped it to the correct page. The classroom was so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the station's ventilation system, which I had never noticed before, because there had always been ambient noise from 23 students, and now there was nothing, because 21 students had stopped generating ambient noise entirely and were sitting in the specific kind of silence that occurs when a species realizes it has been operating on incorrect assumptions. Kosovan, next to me, had not moved. Not even a fraction. I think he was trying to make himself invisible through sheer commitment to stillness. Prethan, on her perch, had all 4 eyes aimed at Sable with an expression that, in Vili culture, I believe indicates maximum priority information update in progress. I, Brelok, son of Vrenna, grandson of the great philosopher Orvastan, had 4 arms and was using none of them. They were just there, attached to my body. Forgotten. On the floor, Tuvnek was making quiet sounds and holding the side of his face. Gorath was staring at the ceiling and breathing. Sable was taking notes. Professor Surath Vel returned from his administrative necessity approximately 3 minutes later. He stood in the doorway. He looked at the room. He looked at Tuvnek on the floor. He looked at Gorath, who had managed to get into a seated position against the wall and was holding his arm against his body with extreme care. He looked at Sable, who was taking notes. He looked at the rest of us, and I think he saw in our collective expressions something that told him exactly what kind of situation he had walked back into, and he made a sound that in Drevian expresses something like, "I should have stayed in the corridor." Medical was called. 2 officers arrived, a Sylvani named Rient Vor and a human named Calloway, which struck me later as deeply fitting, though I did not appreciate the symmetry at the time because I was still reconstructing my understanding of the universe. When the station authorities arrived, they questioned everyone. When they got to Sable, she described what happened with the same calm, factual tone that one might use to describe the correct way to calibrate a navigation instrument. She did not appear agitated. She did not appear sorry. She also did not appear aggressive. She appeared, if anything, slightly inconvenienced, in the way that you are slightly inconvenienced when something unnecessary interrupts a task you were in the middle of. Calloway, the human medical officer, listened to the accounts. Then he looked at Garath's arm and Tuvnek's jaw. Then he looked at Sable, and he said, in a tone that contained absolutely no surprise, "Yeah, that tracks." The medical examination of Gorath revealed that, in addition to the shoulder, he had bruised 2 of his internal organs. Not badly, but they were bruised through his hide. The hide that scientific literature compared to layered composite materials. Through that, from a being who weighed 8 times less than him. Calloway, to his professional credit, explained this to the McCary medical team when they arrived with considerable urgency, and his explanation included a very patient, very clear description of what happens to a human body under extreme stress. The adrenaline, the noradrenaline, the suppression of pain signals, the temporary unlocking of physical output that the human body normally restricts to prevent self-damage. The evolutionary heritage of a species that was, and he said this part, with the particular mild pride that humans seem to carry about their homeworld without even fully noticing it, from a planet where everything was trying to kill them, and they were neither the fastest nor the most armored option available, so they compensated. He said compensated, in the tone of someone describing an understatement. The class listened. Professor Surath Vel listened. I listened with all 4 of my hands gripping the desk edge. Then Calloway looked around at all of us. Specifically, I felt, at me, though this may have been paranoia, and he said, "She is also quite restrained, for the record." She stopped. "That is not nothing." Stopped. He said that like it was remarkable that she stopped. I thought about that for a very long time. It has been 47 rotations since that day. Gorath is back in class. His shoulder healed well, and he has not, since that afternoon, flicked, shoved, or made any kind of physical contact with any student smaller than himself, which is most students. So this represents a considerable behavioral change. He also changed seats. He now sits near the front, close to the professor's desk, and pays close attention to the lesson. And I think this is less about academic motivation and more about never again being in a room where the authority figure is absent. Tuvnek had his jaw corrected by the medical team, which apparently involved a procedure that I read about and then stopped reading about after the second paragraph. He was quiet for a long time after. He is still quiet, mostly. He has also, on 2 separate occasions, held the corridor door open for Sable as she passed. Whether this is genuine courtesy or self-preservation operating as courtesy, I genuinely cannot tell. I suspect Tuvnek cannot tell either. Sable and I started talking about 3 rotations after the incident. She had been sitting alone at the meal hall, which she did a lot, not because no one was friendly, but because most of the student body was still updating their internal files about humans, and doing so from a respectful distance. I sat down because I had 400 questions, and also because the Solvani part of me that my grandfather would recognize was sincerely ashamed that she had been eating alone for 3 rotations and no one had done anything about it. She looked up. I said, "I want to apologize for the student body collectively underestimating you, and also personally. I thought you were, and I want you to know I regret this deeply." Soft. She looked at me for a moment. Then she laughed, not a polite laugh, a real one. The kind that involves her whole face and makes a sound that surprised me, because it was loud and genuine and not at all concerned with how it sounded to others, and I found it, unexpectedly, wonderful. She said, "I am soft. Most of the time." "Most of the time," I repeated. "Most of the time," she confirmed, and she slid a portion of her food across to me as an offering, which I had already learned from xenocultural studies was a human gesture of either friendship or trust or both. And I accepted it, even though I had no idea what it tasted like, and it turned out to taste like something between minerals and sugar. And she watched me try it with an expression of absolute delight, and I understood then that humans find joy in the reactions of others, in a way that is difficult to put into language but very easy to recognize once you have seen it. We have been, since that meal, what I would call friends. She has helped me with navigation theory. I have helped her with Solvani linguistic structures, which are infamously difficult for non-native speakers because we have 17 words for approximately, and none of them mean exactly the same thing. She finds this funny. I am starting to find it funny too, which my grandfather would consider personal growth. She is, in person, warm. She makes jokes that take me a moment to catch and then catch me entirely when they land. She is curious about everything in a way that is almost aggressive, as if she finds it personally offensive that there are things she does not yet understand. She wants to know how the station's gravity plating works, how Solvani art developed alongside Solvani mathematics, what the Vili actually see with their extra pair of eyes, whether the Karathi really do communicate through subsonic floor vibrations, or whether that is a cultural myth. She is also, 3 rotations ago, arm wrestling distance from the corridor, casually leaning against a railing fixture, when the mounting bracket that attached the railing to the wall gave out, because it had apparently been poorly installed during the last maintenance cycle, and she caught the railing, absorbed the momentum, and the bracket tore clean out of the wall. She looked at the bracket in her hand, she looked at the hole in the wall, she laughed. She laughed for a genuinely concerning amount of time, and then she went to find maintenance to report it. I watched this happen, and updated my files again. Here is what I know now. 47 rotations later, as Brelek, son of Vrena, grandson of Orvestan, student of the Galactic Collegiate Exchange Program, and friend, apparently, to a human, humans do not look dangerous. This is a feature, not a flaw. Evolution on their world was competitive in ways that most inhabited planets simply did not produce, and the result was a species that carries its danger quietly, internally, behind a face that defaults to approachable and a voice that defaults to conversational, and which can, on approximately 11 seconds of notice, reconfigure the physical reality of anyone who mistakes approachable for harmless. They chose cooperation. Out of everything available to them after all of that, they chose to come out here and meet everyone else. And they did it without announcing what they were, without leading with the part of themselves that dislocated Tuvnek's jaw and put Gorath's shoulder into a discussion with the floor. They just showed up, curious, warm, carrying everything they are quietly, the way you carry something valuable that you do not need to show to everyone. I find this either very generous or very dangerous, or possibly both. And I suspect that is exactly the point. Sable is currently top of our navigation theory cohort. She eats lunch with me, Preethan, Kosovan, and a Rithari named Vaskai, who joined us 6 rotations ago after discovering that Sable had opinions about Rithari percussion music that were not only informed but enthusiastic. We are, by most reasonable definitions, a group, a social unit, something that functions like what humans call a friend group, which is a phrase that sounds small and is I am learning anything but. Last rotation, she brought us something from the human cultural package that exchange students are allowed to keep. A recording. Music from Earth. Old music, she said, from a period of human history that was difficult and produced, for reasons she found hard to explain simply, some of the most alive-sounding art they ever made. We sat in the common room and listened. It was loud. It was complicated, it had layers that arrived one after another, and then all at once. It sounded like something that had been built by creatures who were aware, at all times, that they were alive, and that this condition was temporary, and who had made something from that awareness that was not sad, but ferocious. Preethan said it made her chest feel strange. Divaskai said it made him want to move. Kosovan said nothing. But he was doing the Rithari head movement that indicates deep processing, which I have come to understand as his version of being moved. I said, "This sounds like your planet." Sable smiled. She said, "Yeah, it kind of does." And I thought about that classroom, 47 rotations ago. The flicker of the stillness before the movement. The 11 seconds. The jaw. The floor. The girl who sat back down and took notes like the universe had simply confirmed something she already knew. I thought about Calloway saying, "She stopped. That is not nothing." I thought about the bracket in the wall, and I thought, we had no idea. We looked at them and we saw soft and we saw small, and we saw 2 arms, 2 legs, no armor, no venom, no claws. And we thought we understood the summary. We had not read the document. We had not even opened it. They came out here with their music and their laughter and their curiosity and their grip strength and their adrenaline and their 1,000-yard stares, and they sat down in our classrooms and our meal halls and our common rooms, and they were warm. They were genuinely, honestly warm, and underneath that warmth was the quiet, patient, carried weight of everything their world made them. And they chose, every single rotation, to show us the warmth first. I am choosing every single rotation to be grateful for that. I am also choosing every single rotation to never, under any circumstances, give Sable Chin a reason to stop. End of report. Brelek, son of Vrenna, currently reconsidering nothing, for once.